Right, so we've got all the bits stripped off the Jag now, or most of the bits that I think we're going to need. And I don't know if I mentioned in the last video, but we're going to start at the back of the car, because this is the area where like the height is quite important, because we're obviously limited by the boot floor. In the Jag, you probably can't see it, the boot floor is quite a bit higher than it is in the Princess, because the Princess is front wheel drive. So it's got a much bigger boot. It's cavernous, the space in there. So I've done some sums and some drawings and some rough measurements, and I was hoping that I was going to be able to leave the boot floor in place and just add in loads of strengtheners and then mount these, which are the rear mounts, directly up to the rear boot floor, and then probably add some triangulation inside to kind of strengthen the floor, obviously, because it's not designed to be load bearing. But I know now, having measured, that if we keep the wheel arches as they are, at the height they are, even with smaller wheels, the car will be too high. I need the boot floor to be at least an inch higher up. So the boot floor's got to go. I was hoping I could keep it, but it's not going to work out. It's not the end of the world. It's fairly minor in that the rest of the car looks like it's going to be pretty good. So yeah, the general plan is to start out with chopping the boot floor out, putting some steel in to take these rear mounts for the rear subframe, so rear of the rear, and then luckily, again, this is all working out pretty well. There's a kick board at where like the back seats are, or heel board, whatever you want to call it, between the boot and the cabin area on the underfloor, and that comes in a perfect position for the front mounts. So the heel board will pretty much sit here, so we're just going to need to create a mount to come off that heel board, and again strengthen it all up on the inside, and then that's going to be the rear end mounted, really. I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to tub the arches, which I was anticipating anyway, and I've obviously got to build rear suspension turrets, and that was the other issue with keeping the boot floor at the height it was. On the Jag, the rear suspension turrets actually sit above the subframe. They're like about here. So really, I was always going to have like a suspension turret sitting in the boot floor anyway. So I think the best thing to do is just to raise the whole thing up. It also makes the roll bar clearance easier, and like lecky handbrake and stuff like that. I'll be able to get at it. So that's the rough plan. Chop the boot floor out, put a strengthener piece in, or put several pieces of box section in to actually take the weight of it all, because it is pretty heavy, this rear end. As you'd expect, it is, you know, the driving end of the car, and obviously the Princess is not really strong. So that's the plan at the back. If we have a look at the front, you'll see what I'm going to do with the front, and again how that's going to work out quite well, and then we'll get onto chopping some stuff. I've loosely laid the front subframe in. Now, what I didn't know when I first started stripping the Jag, and what I said in the last video, was I thought the front subframe was a McPherson strut setup. It's not. It's double wishboned on the front as well. It's just that the front wishbone sits so high I never saw them in the wheel arch. It's like a real curved knuckle which curves over the top of the wheel basically. So that's even better. And the engine mounts in the subframe. So this is looking to be pretty easy swap. The other advantage is that with the hubs in the middle of the wheel arches at the front, again, I'm just measuring roughly at the minute, like roughly to the inch, not to the millimetre, I guess, or to the eighth. The front subframe wants to come up to the height of pretty much the inside, the lower end of this chassis leg on the front. Now, this is probably the strongest bit at the front of the Princess because it's what bears the weight of the engine. The front of the Princess is a lot stronger than the back because obviously it's got the weight of the engine and all of the driven running gear. As I said, this piece is all going to have to come out, but with the subframe at the correct height, the mounts are in either corner and they all sit just inside of the subframe. And so getting the correct height and mounting it is going to be really, really easy. And I'm pretty sure the steering column is going to line up, as in the steering rack, that the shaft that comes out of the rack is going to almost perfectly line up with the hole in the floor where the original steering column goes through. So I've obviously fairly well looked into this one, and there's going to be a ton of room at the front of the engine, so I'm going to be able to use the standard Jag radiator, which means there'll be like no cooling problems with using like aftermarket radiators and things, or radiator off a different car. What you don't know is got the capacity. The engine should go in easily because the engine's just going to mount into the subframe. Obviously, I still need to cut a tunnel and mount the rear end of the gearbox. And that's probably the biggest challenge, to be honest, is going to be getting a tunnel in there that's nice, without encroaching too much onto the inside of the car. I don't want to, if I can help it, damage the interior of the car too much. But yeah, these points, I mean, if you were to like trace them up, all sit nicely in the corners of the subframe and inside the chassis legs. So mounting the front subframe is probably like a day job, really, in terms of getting it in and getting it all strengthened up. So that is the general plan, I guess. Get the rear end up and mounted, get the front end up and mounted, get the engine in. I'm obviously going to have to get the prop shortened down or a new prop made. If anybody knows where I can get that done, please let me know. But other than that, it's looking like it's going to be a fairly, not easy, it won't be easy, but a fairly convenient swap, I guess. So yeah, first thing is to get that boot floor cut out, start cleaning up a load of metal to take the box section that I'm going to put in. I'm not going to worry about putting any panels back in yet, so I'm going to cut all the floor out, not bother putting any panel work in, just put structural steel in to start with, just put all the box in. Some of it will get chopped out at a later date, but it's just in there for now until I start kind of triangulating everything, making kind of a new boot floor, strengthening all the floor up. Yeah, let's just get cutting, I guess. Right, boot floor's chopped out, subframe loosely put into place where I think roughly it wants to be. At the minute I've just got it jacked up on a trolley jack. I'm not going full binky with a like a chassis jig. Maybe for next project. But yeah, as you can see, this is not level by any stretch. We've still got some more bits that are preventing it going up to the correct height. We've got some bits like part of the original bump stops. So I've got some more bits to chop out, but you can see now why I was talking about the boot floor being a bit too low, because that was the boot floor level and that's where that wants to mount. And yeah, I need to bring that up another inch yet, really, at least, because this is where it gets quite tricky in that I've got the Jag, but obviously I want to make sure the ride height of the car is correct on the stock Jag suspension. Now I may well put coilovers on it, but even if I put coilovers on it, unless I go for some like crazy custom build ones, I still want to get the correct suspension travel or amount of travel. I need the car to be at full droop at the correct height, and I need the wheel to not hit the top of the wheel arch whilst using the standard bump stop on the standard subframe. So I do want to try and get it, if I can, to operate as as normally as possible. So next thing really is to chop out the rest of that stock bump stop, which is stopping that top arm. Try and get the subframe in a roughly correct position. I've already kind of measured out where these rear mounts need to go. Although I am now looking at it and I kind of know that the whole centre tunnel of the car is going to have to go. This is the first time I've had it in the correct height, really, and there's not going to be enough room for the clearance of the prop shaft, which also means the standard carpet's not going to fit back in, which is a bit of a bummer. But we now got clearance of the roll bar and everything, so a bit more chopping, and then I can start putting some steel in. Bit more chopping done. I've had to chop out for one of the top arm mounts, and I know I'm going to have to chop more out of the wheel arches anyway, where the top arms actuate. So from those two mounts there and there, obviously there's no room to travel up because the wheel arch is in the way. I knew that, but I'm trying to do the least amount of chopping possible at the minute just to get the subframe into the correct position, and then I can kind of remodel all of the wheel arch. On this car, like the rustiest bits are the wheel arches, and given that I'm going to have to tub them, it kind of does me a favour really. So that's something for the future anyway. It's just a case of getting enough chopped out now that we can get the car basically on its wheels. So with the position the subframe it's in right now, that is level-ish and at the right height-ish, and forward and backwards enough-ish. So what I'm going to do to start with, I'm lacking like some 3mm plate. I was going to kind of like beef up the wheel arch a bit, but again it's so crusty. I'm not sure this piece will end up staying ultimately, but for now it's one of these where it might take me a bit longer to do it this way, but I'll make progress quicker, if that makes sense. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a piece of box section which runs straight across the back of the car at the correct height and distance front to back, and I'm basically going to weld it inside the wheel arch and weld it to this seam, which is another reason why I wanted to keep a bit of this seam. Drill holes through it, and that'll take the rear end of the subframe, and then it's a case of mounting the front end. It's not going to be very strong to start with. It doesn't need to be, because it's not going to bear the weight of the car or anything. Once I've got the subframe mounted, I'm actually going to strip all the running gear off it anyway, and that'll kind of lighten the subframe up. I'll probably strip everything out but the diff. Yeah, and then I can then concentrate on beefing everything up, putting new wheel arches in, building the strut towers and things like that. So that's the next thing to do now really, is clean off a load of paint around here, and yeah, get a piece of box section in front to back to take the rear of the rear subframe mounts. So that's the first real significant step done. It's not going to stay like that, obviously. That piece of box section, that piece of box section might remain, but there will be like, it will kind of triangulate up, because I'm going to build a bit of a roll cage in the back, I guess, because obviously, like I kind of said before, there is no real strength in the back of the car, because all it really needed to carry was like the fuel tank and the outboard wheels really. And this is going to be the driving end of a 500 horsepower car now, so I'm going to triangulate it all a fair bit. I've just banged some holes through there for now. The Jag bushes have like a massive 20mm hole in them, so I'll probably end up welding some kind of locator underneath there, what the bushes kind of slot into. That'll be a nice way of doing it, I think. But that's the first significant step, in that the subframe is now in the middle, in the correct position in the wheel arch, and at the right height, I think, as much as I can really kind of gauge. I will get away with it a bit, like I say, it probably is going to end up on coilovers, so I will be able to mess around with the ride height a bit, but it's getting the drive shaft angles and the wishbones at the correct kind of angle really to make a nice handling car. That's what I'm most concerned with. I do want it to ride quite well, so I don't want to end up having to lower it or higher it, because then I'll just wreck all the suspension geometry. So the next thing really is to start looking at how we're going to mount the front of the rear subframe. Again, I think the front of the rear subframe will probably be done to a more substantial level than what this is, even temporarily, because we're going to have to build some kind of turrets. We'll have to build some kind of box frame that's going to attach to the kickboard. But yeah, we'll have a look at how we're going to do that now. Right, so the front of the rear subframe is pretty much the same as the back, in that it's just two bushes that mount it, two big bushes, these two big rubber bushes, and it's quite conveniently in a nice place in terms of where the kickboard is. and where it comes up to meet the boot floor. So this section here is what would be like the backrest of the back seat, and then of course that's like the bum section, the back seat, and then you got the heel board down here, and that's where the hydroelastic trail arm used to mount. So I'm going to more or less do it in quite a similar way, I think. It's a shame that these are too far outboard for me to use them, because again, else I could just bolt something in here. I probably could, but if I do it this way, it'll be a lot better. So we'll lop these off. I'll clean up all the heel board, and then we're basically going to fabricate like a sheet panel type like this to mount that, I think. I think that's going to be the best way of doing it. And then we can tie in the strength all up here, and then that'll take quite a lot of the load through into the car. So that'll sit on a nice platform, which is all a big steel box section, a sheet steel kind of box that we've fabricated to go in here. It'll become more obvious as I create some cardboard patterns and start cutting, I guess. But yeah, the first thing really is to start cutting these off now and get all this area cleaned up, because say this is going to be a lot more permanent than what that rear fixing will be. So just before we kind of locate the front of the rear subframe onto that heel board that I was talking about, the kind of big subframe bushes have got like a really big kind of hole in them, and it's for that alignment. And then they have like a big jig when they build the car to make sure they get the subframe like bang on where it needs to be. We're not going to build it to those kind of tolerances. We need it to be tighter than that. We need to make sure that we've got that subframe bang in the middle before I go and weld on those front mounts. So I've made two little, just little mild steel bits of tube. We only had 25mm tube and I need like 24. So I just cut a bit out and make it round. And what that'll do is that'll locate the subframe in the middle there. So what I will do is I will weld that on the underside of the box section in the middle of the hole. I'm just going to put like a big blob of MIG weld either side, or like maybe I'll do it 4 times, I don't know. And then when I put the bolt through, it won't matter. Like the kind of the subframe will be centrally located on these 2 points. Then that allows me to pop the subframe back up again, get it all leveled up. I know it's square tramming right down the car, and yeah, I can make those front mounts. Right, so we're onto these front mounts now. As I said before, the most substantial part of this car is that heel board, because that's where the rear trailing arms mount, and they are heavy. So I know if we build a good kind of box section mount, or like a fabricated sheet metal mount, that'll be more than good enough to take the weight of everything, I think. I said there's going to be some kind of like internal structures to the boot floor anyway, and we can beef it all up after. Probably going to pass like a bit of roll cage tubing from one side to the other and things like that, just to try and kind of triangulate and just beef it all up really. First thing is a bit of cardboard. I've cut that to roughly the size I think it wants to be, and that is going to go between the subframe and that heel board there. Yeah, and then what we're going to have is a piece of tube which goes up here, up to here, and then we'll have another piece of steel or cardboard which comes out from here and joins that piece of tube up, and then we'll fill in the sides, and obviously we'll do that both sides. So first thing really is to get this piece of tube cut, get this piece of sheet cut, get a hole in it, get a piece of tube that goes through it, locate it onto the subframe, locate it onto the heel board and tack that on, and then start working on the top bit. Again, do it both sides. So hopefully this is making a bit more sense now. What I've got is a piece that will stick out the bottom, which will drop into the bush to locate it. This will obviously be welded onto the body, and then there'll be another piece which goes across the top up to near the boot floor area. And that means that when I bolt through, I'll be able to clamp right down and we'll have all of this surface area that's kind of welded around attached to the car body. And of course, like I say, I'll also bridge it across to the other side and maybe over the top to the back and across the wheel arches. But this is just to get us started, just to actually get the subframe mounted in position. Ignore the snot that came out the end of the MIG gun. Right, so we've got that lower bit tacked on now. It's really hard to get in to actually tack it well, so I've just had to kind of get it on as good as I can. Next bit I need is that bit coming off the top. So there's going to be a bit coming off the top, like onto the top of that tube, again with a hole in it. And once I get that tacked on, they do the same on the other side. I can drop the subframe out the way, and hopefully I'll then be able to kind of fill all the gaps in and give it all a proper weld up without the subframe in the way. But I think as the project progresses, I'm going to need to get the car higher off the ground because it's just a bit of a nightmare to work on at the minute. But yeah, another cardboard pattern, get that tacked on, same again on the other side. So, as you can now see, I've got that top plate welded on as well and got it welded to the tube. So I've now got two pieces sandwiched against the heel board there. Got a good weld across the top, because that's one I could get in at to weld. I'll do the bottom one when I take the subframe out. And then it's just going to be a case of filling in the gaps. So I'll make basically 3 plates to go around it, either side and then on the other end. And then I'll do the same on the other side. And then I think what we'll do is we'll actually bridge the two together with a piece of tube or a piece of box section, just to add in, you know, more strength. I think it'll be fine, but you know, as they say on Bad Obsession Motorsport, overkill is my second favourite kind of kill. So that's what I'm going to go for. Bit of overkill. Can never have too much 3mm plate. And I don't really want it cracking, you know, in years to come. I'd like it to be fairly reliable. So yeah, we're gonna beef it right up and make it super sturdy. So got both mounts kind of half welded in now on the front, and you can kind of see what I'm trying to do. So of course it still looks a bit rough at the minute. But what we'll do now is we'll like panel over all the way around like that, and then that'll make one solid box section. Then it'll be welded all the way around, all the way down, and all the way back up, and that'll be on one of the more structural sections of the car. And then I think what we'll probably do is we'll probably run a piece between these two boxes, a good piece of tube between the two like stick out box sections. And that'll probably complete that kind of rear mount, front rear mount, I guess. And then it's a case of going back onto those rear ones and deciding how we're going to do that once we've started to cut at the arches, because the next thing really is starting to look at how we're going to mount the top mounts for the struts. So yeah, there's still a lot to think about, but I'm really happy with how this is coming out. It is kind of fitting together quite well. So just a case of a bit more measuring now and a bit more head scratching. And yeah, we'll be on to the next stage. So thanks for watching.